Hello and welcome to Film Teach, self-education through films. If you are interested to know how films can be used to improve our understanding of everyday concepts and phenomena in a useful way, this audio essay series is for you. My name is Disha, and I study one film at a time to distill from it practical and useful insights. Today's audio essay, the third in the series, and also the last one I studied the film Jurassic Park for, is focused on exploring the concept of humility. It is something that the film's chaotician, Ian Malcolm, brings up often in reference to John Hammond's attitude towards his grand plan of resurrecting dinosaurs. Yet, an understanding of humility might not be one of the first things one would expect to understand from the film, but it is there, palpitating, breathing, and simmering, especially in its absence in Hammond's personality. And that's exactly where we are going to find out more about it. Let's get right to it. Jurassic Park's John Hammond is presented to us as a wealthy businessman and a charismatic grandfather-like figure. His wit and humor bring us closer to his character as the film progresses. He seems to get everything he wants, either with his money or his disempowering charm. He's full of enthusiasm and is able to touch others with his ageless vigor. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who could bring harm to anyone, right? Yet, it is under his watch that lives are either lost or gravely jeopardized. Was there something lurking behind Hammond's infectious charm? Something perhaps he didn't know himself? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, that's not the score I wish to settle with this audio essay. However, I do wish to understand what really caused Hammond's grand venture to spiral downwards. What began as something larger than life, equipped with the most robust technology and security measures, crumbled at the very feet of its creator. How? According to Ian Malcolm, the chaotician, the answer can be found in Hammond's staggering lack of humility in front of nature. Ian was appalled by the kind of control Hammond thought he could exercise by challenging nature's decision to select dinosaurs for extinction 65 million years ago. For Ian, nature doesn't make mistakes. And in bringing dinosaurs back, that is in fact what Hammond was implying. For a chaotician like Ian, Hammond's lack of humility was akin to blasphemy, and therefore not without dire consequences. And dire consequences indeed unfold. When people got killed, the T-Rex rode his return, and Hammond himself was forced to flee with his tail between his legs. One can argue that if Dennis Nedry, the park's resident coder, had chosen his job, his duty, over his greed, then Jurassic Park would have in fact become hugely successful. But Nedry too belongs to Hammond's chest of wrong choices. I have discussed this in an earlier essay titled, "Can Jurassic Park Help Us Understand the Relationship Between Man and Machine Better?" and have linked it in the description box for anyone who might be interested in exploring it. And therefore, as Ian Malcolm had put it, danger was indeed inherent in Hammond's venture, with or without Nedry. As a chaotician, Ian linked Hammond's lack of humility to the chaos that he unconsciously brought upon himself, his grandchildren, his team, and several other people. Clearly, he's not the ideal person to learn about humility from. But I do believe that in studying his choices and his actions, one can come to understand what humility is not. This way of looking at things is called negative knowledge, which according to businessinnovation.berkeley.edu can be defined as an awareness of what not to do or of paths to avoid. So the question that I decided to pursue was this: can Jurassic Park's John Hammond help us understand what humility is not? Here is what I found. Overestimating one's control is not humility. This point, rather this problem, was brought to the table by Dr. Ellie Sattler during the lunch scene. For her, Hammond's assumption that he and his scientists could control a force that had been extinct for 65 million years threw serious doubts on their understanding of what they had created. And when Dr. Grant, the paleontologist, later points out that it is impossible to control 65 million-year-old gut instinct, Hammond's enterprise had started to lose a bit of its grand appeal. And as it turns out, not only did the dinosaurs show their prowess in hunting, they also found a way to procreate. Playing God is not humility. Usually, I refrain from using such phrases as playing God. However, the reason I made an exception in this case is because Hammond's scientists truly did something that interfered with the process of creation itself, when his chief geneticist, Dr. Wu, emphatically stated that it was in fact quite simple to control the sex of the dinosaurs. For Hammond and his geneticists, this was scientifically driven control at its best. In short, their experiment with life was scientified, but not sanctified. And while they took all precautions in conducting it, in disabling one of nature's functions, they greatly faltered in assuming that nature plays only by the rules yet discovered by man. For me, in giving his nod to the whole operation, Hammond ended up playing God and paying dearly for his and his scientists' short-sightedness. Confusing blind ambition with a noble aim is not humility. In what I like to call the ice cream scene, after momentarily lamenting the fate of his grandchildren, Hammond quickly jumps to unburden his heart of what was truly weighing it down. In his mind, he had created dinosaurs to show something real to people, something that's not an illusion, and that in failing in his enterprise, he had somehow let them down. However, as Dr. Sattler rightly figures out, John's endeavor, although no longer a flea circus, was still an illusion. In denying the embryos their rightful hormone, Hammond and his team of geneticists had tricked the dinosaurs into coming back to life. And as is with all illusions, sooner or later the veil is lifted and the truth reveals itself, in this case with fury and violence. Lack of humility is limiting one's responsibility. Ian was not in favor of Hammond's little science project right from the get-go. He saw Hammond as a reckless child playing with fire. Being reckless, the child only sees the fun involved in playing his game and does not once conceive the possibility of getting burnt. However, when he does get singed, he runs over to his house and in the process burns everything he touches to the ground. Ian could clearly see that Hammond had no real idea of what he had created and therefore no way of controlling it when things went out of hand. This attitude, as the film shows, caught Hammond and his entire crew by surprise, and in being too sure of their success, they found themselves ill-equipped to deal with life when things went sideways. Willful ignorance is not humility. When Dr. Sadler points out that the plants they had chosen because they look good are in fact poisonous, it showed how little knowledge Hammond and his team really had about what they were building. Either the team hired by John was ill-equipped, or they willfully chose to ignore their poisonous nature over their ornamental appeal. This was ignorance at its worst, and it gave birth to dire consequences. Doing something just because one can, without considering if one should, is not humility. John Hammond wasn't a geneticist. John Hammond wasn't a paleontologist. He was just a very wealthy man who felt that his money gave him the pass to do extraordinary things. He stood on the shoulders of giants, confused an accidental finding for a painstaking discovery, and saw his money as his ability. In not questioning his dream, his vision, in getting carried away by the novelty of an idea, he became a mere pawn at the hands of his own ignorance. Not subscribing to chaos is not humility. I asked myself, at what point did chaos enter the film? Well, one answer would be right at the start. When one of the guards gets eaten by a velociraptor that is being shifted to its cage by a gun-wielding security crew, chaos had entered the story and the minds of the audience of 1993 who felt paralyzed by a new form of fear, dinosaurs. Yet another answer would be the moment when Hammond concluded that he had complete control over a force that he did not fully understand. Dinosaurs and men had been separated from each other by 65 million years. To bring them back to civilization, to a world they no longer naturally belonged to, was one part ambitious, sure, an ode to the vision of man, and one part, a staggering display of lack of humility before nature. In my eyes, chaos entered the park when John's lack of humility failed to factor in the unknown aspect of his venture, and driven thus by a blind faith in the park's superior technology, John unconsciously rang the death knell on his dream. The concept of the unconscious was delved into deeply by late Swiss psychoanalyst Mr. Carl Jung. You'll find the internet flooded with commentaries on his observations and numerous new ones that pick up where he left off. Most of Mr. Jung's observations are quotable, but the one that has made the most impact on me is one where he says, quote, "If you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate," unquote. In the film we witness the fate of the park and also John Hammond's. The former gets destroyed and the latter disheartened. Seeing that the destruction brought about by T-Rex and the velociraptors was beyond John's control and did indeed direct his life at that point, he was forced to leave the island to save his life and also agree with Dr. Grant to not endorse his own venture anymore. It made me wonder about the aspect of his unconsciousness that Hammond did not make conscious to himself. And it seemed that it was indeed his lack of humility in refraining from subscribing to chaos that made him overestimate his control and underestimate the power of nature. The overarching question helped me see humility in a new light, that perhaps it's a tool of protection, an armor for the soul, something like that. That without it, we are more vulnerable to chaos than we ought to be. I understood that humility can help one know and act as per the extent of one's control, and accept one's lack of control beyond it. I also came to think of humility as something that keeps us on our feet in the world of matter or consciousness, and on our knees in the world of spirit or the unconscious. Before ending this essay, I'd like to list the main insights my observation revealed about what humility is not. 1. Overestimating one's control is not humility. 2. Playing God is not humility. 3. Confusing blind ambition with a noble aim is not humility. 4. Lack of humility is limiting one's responsibility. 5. Willful ignorance is not humility. 6. Doing something just because one can, without considering if one should, is not humility. And 7. Not subscribing to chaos is not humility. So this is what I found out. What about you? Add your insights in the comments section, and if you found it useful, do share it with your friends, and maybe let me know too. Thanks for being here. See you next time.